Pastor Lee?
Well, Patricia, I'm right here, at home. I'm back.
This is a church. This is a steeple. Open the doors and see all the people. Hey! Where are all the people? I may not see you, but I know that we're together.
Good morning and welcome to worship. My name is Lee Nish. I'm pastor at Sparks United Methodist Church, and this Sunday we're celebrating something very special in the life of our country and also in the life of the state of Nevada. We're celebrating the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote, the 100th anniversary of that happening this coming Wednesday. And so we start our worship right here in the Nevada State Railroad Museum in Carson City, because much of the negotiating that took place would not have happened without this train, and particularly I'm standing right in front of the suffrage special, the very car that many of the suffragettes traveled in. The Virginia and Truckee Railroad played an important role in Nevada's suffrage history. It delivered VIP Eastern suffragettes to Carson City to discuss suffrage with Governor Boyle in 1916, and it ferried ardent Nevada suffragists from Reno to Carson City to participate in Governor Boyle's signing of our nation's 19th Suffrage Amendment ratification on February 7th, 1920. And how did they do that? They put one foot in front of the other to lead with love. All aboard!
You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love.
1 foot, 1 foot, a 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot, a 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot, a 1 foot, lead with love. 1 foot, 1 foot, a 1 foot,
in front of the other.
A 1 foot, 1
Put
foot,
1 foot
a 1 foot,
and lead with love.
1
Put
foot,
1 foot
a 1 foot,
in front of the other. Lead with love. Put 1 foot
a 1 foot,
and lead with love.
1
Put 1 foot
a 1
in front of the other. Lead with love. Put 1 foot and lead with love. You gotta put 1 foot in front of the other and lead with the other. Lead with love. 1 foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put 1 foot in front of the other and lead with the other. Lead with love. 1 foot in front of the other and lead with love.
Don't give up hope.
Don't give up hope.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Don't you give up.
Don't you give up.
Keep moving on.
Keep moving on. You gotta put 1 foot in front of the other and ride with the other. Lead with love. 1 foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put 1 foot in front of the other and ride with the other. Lead with love. 1 foot in front of the other and lead with love.
Lift up your eyes,
Lift up your eyes.
don't you despair.
Don't you despair.
Look up ahead,
Look up ahead.
the path is there.
The path is there. You gotta put 1 foot in front of the other
A 1 foot,
and ride with the other. Lead with love. 1 foot in front of the other
a 1
and lead with love. You gotta put 1 foot in front of the other
a 1
and ride with the other. Lead with love. 1 foot in front of the other and lead with love. I know you're scared. I know you're scared. And I'm scared too. And I'm scared too. But here I am. But here I am. to you, right next to you. We gotta put one foot in front of the other, and lead with the other. One foot in front of the other, and lead with love. We gotta put one foot in front of the other, and ride with the other. One foot in front of the other, and lead with love. And lead with love, and lead with love.
Hello, I'm Patricia, and I'm here to read the scripture today from the book of Ruth, the story of Naomi and her daughters-in-law. Chapter 1, verses 15 through 17. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her.
So here we are in front of the Nevada State Legislature building in Carson City, Nevada. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what does this message have to do with the story of Ruth? Well, we're going to get to that in just a moment. But before we do, let me just give you a little background on the whole process of women getting the right to vote that we call women's suffrage. Women first organized and collectively fought for suffrage at the national level in July of 1848. Suffragists such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott convened a meeting of over 300 people in Seneca Falls, New York. In the following decades, women marched, protested, lobbied, and even went to jail. By the 1870s, women pressured Congress to vote on an amendment that would recognize their suffrage rights. The amendment was sometimes known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment and became the 19th Amendment. That amendment reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." After decades of arguments for and against women's suffrage, Congress finally passed the 19th Amendment in June of 1919. After Congress approved the 19th Amendment, at least 36 states needed to vote in favor of the amendment for it to become law. The process is called ratification. 35 states, including the state of Nevada, had voted for ratification, and it all came down to one of the southern states, heavily influenced by Reconstruction, and that state was the state of Tennessee. When members of the Tennessee state legislature debated on whether or not to ratify the amendment, the state Senate voted to ratify. But in the state House of Representatives, the vote resulted in a tie. A young man named Harry Byrne, who had already said that he was going to vote against ratification, cast the tie-breaking vote in favor of ratification because he was acting on the advice from his mother, Phoebe. Byrne voted to ratify the amendment. I'm sure that Byrne did not relish facing his mother and telling her why he voted against this ratification for the amendment. And you know, you cannot underestimate the influence of a mother's advice at the right time. In this case, it was Byrne's mother's advice. In the book of Ruth, it was Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, who suggested that she get to know Boaz, which later ended in a marriage and a birth. And decades later, that resulted in the birth of King David. Now, we're going to get to that story in just a minute, but before we do, just to conclude this piece of it, on August 18th, 1920, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment. With Tennessee's ratification, the 19th Amendment became law, ensuring that the right to vote could not be denied based on sex. The story, however, from this point on, gets more exciting. I want to read to you this news item that came across the wires recently. On Monday, February 10th, Nevada's State House began its legislative session by marking a major milestone. It's the first time in our nation's history that any state legislature held a majority of female lawmakers. Just like the country, the body is slightly more than half women. It's been a long, hard fight, says Patricia Ann Spearman, a Democrat and Nevada senator who was first elected in 2012. I'm starting to see some of the fruits of not just my labor, but the labor of so many other people whose names I don't even know. She says, I've had to fight for everything that I have. All the titles, none of that was given to me. Women in Nevada, she says, have said it's time to do away with patriarchy that holds people down. It's just time to do away with it. With its overall majority, Nevada is the exception. This year, 50.8% of state representatives and senators combined are women. Now, I want to point out that February 10th of this year was when the majority became women in the state legislature. That is 100 years after the 19th Amendment was passed, giving the women the right to vote. Sometimes change takes place over decades, very similar to the way change took place as we read it in the book of Ruth. It took decades, in fact generations, for King David to be born. But the story of Ruth and Naomi became a very important piece in the history of that story. And just as here in Carson City, Nevada, the state legislature 100 years ago voted to ratify the 19th Amendment, now in 2020, 100 years later, a majority, slim majority, of this legislature is held by women. Sometimes we think that God's hand should act upon human affairs instantaneously. And if it doesn't happen, we lose heart, we lose faith. But I just want to return to this thought. God's providence is steadfast. God's providence continues to be shed in human events. And now we're going to hear how some of those events became actions by our United Methodist women as we hear from Patricia Wilson, who will continue this message.
Our nation will be commemorating the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which gave the women the right to vote. This historical time began in the 1800s by the abolitionist activists. Some were involved in religious movements, anti-slavery movements, and moral reform societies. A period between the Civil War and World War II, suffrage activities slowed down a bit. But in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the activity picked up again, and there were two groups competing to get the work done. Two women we know and read about are Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was the leader of the American Women's Suffrage Association. Susan B. Anthony. She was the leader of the National Women's Suffrage Association. These women realized they could get more things done if they united for the cause, and now the movement became the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Talk about compromise. These women were out in the streets protesting and demanding their rights to vote. They were beaten and jailed, much like what we see today in the Black Lives Matter movement. Two lesser-known women, Lucy Stone and Alice Blackwell, were a mother and daughter team who served the movement as editors of the suffrage newspapers. Information opens the mind. Here are a few facts my research has uncovered. The first country to grant the vote to women was New Zealand in 1893, followed by Australia in 1902. However, in 1869, the legislators in the Laramie, Wyoming, passed the Suffrage Act, allowing the women in Wyoming to vote. There was, of course, opposition and anti-suffrage groups. Not just the men that was against it, but there were a lot of women against suffrage at the time. So listen to some of the reasoning that they gave us. Women's brains are inferior to men. Women are too good for the dirty work of politics. The mental exertion would cause infertility. Women should be submissive and only concerned about their home and family. Women's brains are inferior to men. As a United Methodist woman and president of the Sparks group of women, I had to know about some of the United Methodist women that were involved in this movement. So I will give you a few, not all, but a few. First, Anna Howard Shaw. In 1904, she was the first United Methodist woman to become the president of the National American Suffrage Association. Frances Willard. Frances was a factory worker. She was a union leader, working to get 8-hour workdays for women and improving the lives of women and girls. Sojourner Truth, born Isabella Baumfree into slavery in New York, sold away from her parents at age 9, escaped from bondage in 1827. Mary McLeod Bethune, a known educator, a champion for the rights for African American voters. Jessie Daniel Ames, a woman in Texas, where Texas being the strongest opposition state in the South, and she was able to make them the first state to ratify an anti-lynching bill. Dorothy Height, a voter rights activist, organized the National Council of Negro Women. Ida B. Wells, an educator, was also an investigative journalist. She exposed the racist terror of lynching and was one of the founding members of the NAACP. Mary Church Terrell, the first African-American woman to earn a college degree. She was an activist for the civil rights and the women's suffrage. Last but not least, Victoria Woodhull. She was the first woman to be a stockbroker. She was nominated in 1872 for President of the United States by the Equal Rights Party. But you know that didn't go far. She was an eloquent speaker, however, and she was sent to the House of Representatives to argue about the bill to get the right to vote. Of course, the bill was defeated, but you know what they say, 3 times the charm. The states ratified the bill, and on August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was proclaimed a part of the Constitution by the Secretary of State, Bainbridge Colby. Be well, be healthy, be bold, and vote.
God of our fathers, by whose guiding hand we all were led to this Pacific land, to raise on high the standard of the free. We
Hi, my name is Cindy Evans, and I'll be leading us in prayer today. I invite you to bring all your cares, your concerns, and your joys as we pause to open our hearts to God hearing us and us hearing Him. Please pray with me. Loving God, help us to feel your strengthening presence within us. Help us to put our trust in you and know that you will empower and enable us to be in service. We bring the names and concerns of those who are dear to us in this moment. We seek for them and pray for them, your healing and compassionate love. Let us be also willing to place our needs and concerns before you. Give us a powerful sense of restoration and reconciliation to you for your love. And we ask these things in the name of your Son, who taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for worship, and I'm going to ask you to do something special for us this week. This Wednesday, I would love for you to wear these colors. You don't have to wear an ascot, but if you have anything that is gold, purple, and white. Gold, purple, and white are the suffrage colors, and so we celebrate the 100th anniversary this Wednesday with women all across the country who gained the right to vote. I'm also going to ask you to do one more thing. I want to make sure that you vote. The vote is a special part of our discipleship. It is a gift, part of God's providence to us, that we get to participate in our nations, our states, our counties, and our cities' government. And so please vote. If there's any help that you need on voting, please call the church office. We will be happy to help you in any way we can to ensure that you cast a vote during the coming elections. Now, as always, we're grateful for your continued financial support. If you're in arrears during the summer, please just catch up, because we always use the funds that we receive not only to continue the ministry, but also to plan for putting next year's budget together. So that is also very helpful to us. We also want to let you know that we continue our service opportunities with the farmers market, with the food pantry, and in any way that you want to help, we'll try to put you to work. So thank you for joining us. Goodbye, be safe, and God bless.
Good news, ladies. Good news, ladies. Good news, ladies. We're going to let you vote. Merrily we'll go along, go along, go along. Merrily we'll go along, down to the polls we'll go. Sweet dreams, ladies. Sweet dreams, ladies. Sweet dreams, ladies.